Welcome to episode 93 of I Thought I Knew How, a podcast about knitting and life and all sorts. I'm your host, Anne Frost, and this episode was recorded on February 4th, 2023, and February 7th. We are going on a walk today along the lovely main shopping street of Lerwick and out to a popular destination on the far end of town. So many of you out there have expressed an interest in coming that I thought it might be nice to go on a little stroll together. Before we start, I'd like to thank my new patrons, Katie, John, Molly, and Lois for becoming producers of the show over at patreon.com/IThoughtIKnewHow. You and all my other lovely patrons are keeping the lights on at the podcast and giving me the motivation to keep this little project moving along. Thanks so much for your support. Also, many thanks to Knit New Haven and the Morehouse Merino flock for sponsoring the podcast. Knit New Haven has some needle felting classes coming up with Going Gnome at the end of February. Make sure to visit knitnewhaven.com for details about that. And the Morehouse Merino flock group is going into a couple of projects that incorporate welts. If you would like to have a look at those, find the latest episode of that knitting show on YouTube and then hop over to morehousemerinoflock.com to sign up and join in. A few years ago, I was stumped about what to do for an episode, and I was feeling a bit stir-crazy and not in the mood to talk knitting so much. So I went for a walk and I took you with me. The response to the episode was massively popular, which was a relief because it was very much off topic. Today, I'm going to take you on another walk, this time through the main commercial district of Shetland. I'll share some information about the community, but mainly this will serve as a walking tour of the fiber destinations in town here. I recorded it on the first Saturday morning of February, and the town was quiet to start, but you'll hear that it gets busier as the walk goes on. As it was a walk and talk, it was completely unscripted, so I need to fix a few things. First of all, you will hear that I sound pretty out of breath. That's not because the walk is particularly rigorous. It's actually the result of reduced lung capacity due to a cold. I did cut the coughs out of the recording, but some of the gasps for air are still in there. At one point, I said it's spring. I know February's not spring. The weather has just been fairly mellow, and it's messed with my sense of time. I also said at one point that it's rain daily, and I think that you could take that to mean that I'm saying it's rain daily through the whole winter here. And I didn't mean that it's rain daily all winter, just that it's rain daily since I arrived the week before I recorded the walk and talk. When I mentioned the Shetland Textile Museum, I said there was another floor at one point when I meant another room. But there are two floors, but I just meant in that moment to refer to the other room on the ground floor. All of that said, I will come back briefly at the end to say a proper goodbye. For now, here's a little fiber tour of Lerwick. I'm standing along a shoreline in front of a little wall that is keeping me from falling over the edge onto the rocks below. The tide is in, and so the water's right up to the wall. There are worn stones down below and bits of seaweed stalks trapped against the wall. To my left is the Lodberries, one of the most iconic buildings in Lerwick. It is the home of Jimmy Perez in the show Shetland, which many people are familiar with. It's a lot of people's first exposure to Shetland and how people start collecting information. As is with many on-site shooting locations, though, only part of the show is actually filmed here in Shetland, and some of the directions can be a little confusing for locals who know the area better. You might be in one part of Shetland for one shot and a totally different one for the next shot. The Lodberry is the official name of the building, but there's actually a series of Lodberries along the waterfront in Lerwick. Lodberries are buildings that were built right out into the water, and it allowed the people who are transporting goods to load directly onto boats and into their warehouses along the water. As I head towards the main part of the street, the next place we come to is Baines Beach.
Baines Beach is a little bit of sandy beach here in town. There is still the retaining wall along the road, keeping us from falling down into it. But there are some uneven steps that lead down to it. And when the tide is out, it's actually an excellent place to look for sea glass and sea pottery. On one side, it is bordered by the official Lodberry that we all know so well. And the other side is bordered by the Queen's Hotel. And the story is that when any pottery or dishes or anything like that broke at the Queen's Hotel, it would just be thrown out into the water. And as a result, now you can walk along the seashore here, Baines Beach, and pick up little bits of interesting pottery and still see the old prints on many of them. I think that the sea glass continues to be supplemented to this day by people throwing things in, but I don't want to commit to that. I'm not 100% sure. I've paused here for a moment to do the description, but we're going to continue walking to the north, and I'm doing this because many of you are going to want to come to Shetland at some point. This is a pilgrimage site, if you will, for many knitters. Shetland Wool Week has made people more aware of the wonderful resources available here. Not just the wool, but the teachers and the information. Some of the instructors here grew up in homes where they were production knitters along with other members of their family. And the demand for that fell dramatically in the 70s, and the desire for that fell as well when the oil came to Shetland and people didn't have to knit anymore. There were other ways to make ends meet. But in the last several decades, there's been a resurgence in the knitting community here and trying to preserve the traditional ways that knitters work here in Shetland and the history of the craft here. And that is in large part because of Shetland Wool Week. As I pass along the wall to my right, I'm going to pass by the Queen's Hotel and make my way to the start of Commercial Street. Now, for those of you who come as on a day trip on a cruise, you may not have time to get past Commercial Street, and you're going to hear that is okay. There is plenty to see and do for knitters along Commercial Street. For those of you who are here longer, you will be able to see and do more and get further afield. And I do have an episode early on in the podcast that's more of a travelogue of Shetland as a whole. But I wanted to take you along Commercial Street today and let you know about the resources along this way. And you know what? It's spring, and spring means we go on a walk. So welcome to our spring walk. This time, rather than going along the walking path near my house, we are in Lerwick. So I am on Commercial Street now. That short little walk should give you a sense of how close things are here. And the first shop of interest that I come to is on my left, and that is the Shetland Times bookstore. This is I would say, quote-unquote normal bookstore. You'll find all kinds of books here in the Shetland Times Bookshop, but they also have a publishing side to them where they publish a great deal of knitting books of interest to the area, such as the Shetland Knitter's Handbook, Knitting by the Fireside and On the Hillside. I might have that backwards. That might be Knitting on the Hillside and By the Fireside. But this is definitely a spot to pop into if you make it here. You can also get copies of Shetland Guild of Spinners, Knitters, Weavers, and Dyers books here. There's different merchandise that will be of interest to those who are interested in wool and knitting. There is the Shetlanders Fair Isle Graph book you can find here. Also, Fair Isle knitting patterns, which some of these titles you'll be able to find in other places around Shetland, but this is a great one-stop shop to find pretty much every book that is being published about Shetland knitting today. So I'm going to continue on down the road. Commercial Street is paved with pavers rather than tarmac, and it is mostly pedestrianized, though people are allowed to pass through with their cars for access to different businesses. So you do need to be careful. The next spot of interest is, of course, Jamison's Knitwear. They have 2 windows that they always have beautifully decorated with different knitting. Now, because this is February, the first window that we come to is on the side, and it is all in pinks and grays and purples, and it's a Valentine's theme with a giant heart painted around the edge, and then there is some of their Shetland tweed and knitwear displayed in the window, as well as these great big Fair Isle hearts dangling from the top, and some of the merchandise along the bottom. It's a really cute display. Going around to the front, they still have their Apelia display up. Now, Apelia, of course, is the fire festival that takes place in Shetland every year on the last Tuesday of January here in Lerwick, though there are events that start in January and go through March in other parts of the island, and that is why I'm here this time, was for Apelia. So in this display window, there actually is no knitting. It is all shields and axes and swords and banners, of course, from previous Apelias. So as we go along the street, there's lots of different displays still in place that celebrate this event. Moving down the street and crossing over is Anderson Co. Anderson Co. used to be one of the big buyers and exporters of hand knitwear, and it's still an excellent place to go to find hand knit sweaters, meaning for the most part sweaters that were machine knit for the bodies, and then the yokes were picked up and knit. They have a wide variety of these, and they also have some plain sweaters, and this also can be a good place to find some imported Norwegian sweaters. They also have scarves and tams and things like that are available in the shop. But Anderson Co. at this point is more of a wider ranging shop. So this is a traditional yarn store as well. In the back you can go, and they have all sorts of yarn, modern acrylics and different cottons and things like that. If you need needles, this is a good place to find them. They also carry sheepskins. They carry a lot of baby goods as well. So this is just a good general store to pop into. One of the things I really like is oftentimes, yes, I see some through the window now, they will have bags of small balls of yarn. So you can pop in, and I think it's like 2 or 3 pounds. You can get a huge bag. You can get a huge bag of small balls of wool in many, many different colors, and it's a good way to just, go and grab a couple of those bags and have a lot of colors to play with when you go home. So I'm actually going to cross the street again for safety, because now I'm arriving at the Market Cross. Now the Market Cross is, the town center, I suppose. It's where the commercial street is bisected. Well, not even really bisected. Another street comes up from the harbor and connects with Commercial Street here, and in the center there's a pediment with a large lamppost at the top of it, and this sort of opens up enough space for people to come and gather. So this is one of the gathering points on the morning of Apelia. People come through and wait here, and the Jarl squad comes through, and they have posted their bill in the middle of the square with a bunch of inside jokes and a declaration that they're taking over the day's entertainment. And they come and they sing the Apelia song, and they thank everyone, and then they move along with their morning. At the head of Market Cross, there is the tourist center, which, of course you're going to want to pop in there if you're here on your own and looking for guidance, but it's also a wonderful place to come and find a lot of handmade items from creators here in Shetland who are located further afield in Shetland. This is an excellent shop to come in and find some works from people who are based out of some of the outermost islands, and just, places that are harder to find. So the tourist center carries a lot of those makers here. I can see publications by Misha Hay. I can see some glance and glass pieces. Avril Thompson has some of her work in here. So it's really just a good little shop. Even if you're not in need of tourist help, it's a great place to pop in and do a little bit of shopping. So we're going to continue to move down Commercial Street. Now I am only progressing down Commercial Street as I say I am, so you can get a sense of already how much there is to see here. I got a little quiet there because I am a little shy about talking into my microphone as I'm passing people on the street. You'll have to excuse my voice as well because I did come down with a cold a few days after I got here. I know it is not the dreaded C word. I've taken multiple tests, but I did neglect to bring antibacterial wipes with me on the plane. So there's my little tip for you. Always remember the antibacterial wipes so that you can wipe everything down when you first get on the plane. That's my secret tip to staying healthy. The next shop I want to talk about is the British Red Cross charity shop. And you might think, why would I bother with a charity shop when I am visiting Lerwick, maybe for just a day, maybe for a few days? This is a great place to come into because a lot of the local knitters will either donate things that no longer fit them or donate new items that they have knit to help raise funds for the charity. Now there's this shop here, the British Red Cross. If you were to progress down towards the harbor, there is a cancer charity down there that also has a lot of hand knits. All of the charity shops in town can be a good place to find knitting books and also to find needles, especially the long double pointed needles that are used commonly here. So if you do make it here, I suggest that you pop into the charity shops that you pass. The next shop that we have is Ninian, and this is owned by Joanna Hunter, who is a machine knitter, a locally born machine knitter and designer, and she has some wonderful Fair Isle pieces that are very modern in appearance. They have modern cuts, they have modern patterns and modern coloring, and it's really beautiful work. There's cushions, there's different types of cardigans, there's different types of sweaters, and the whole shop is just a wonderful store for popping in and finding all sorts of wonderful gifts for people. So there's note cards and there's flasks and there's mugs and there's different toiletries and things like that. So this is a wonderful little store to pop into. Joanna Hunter actually has designed for several movies in the past and used to work in London designing different knitwear patterns for different designers. So passing just a few spots down, we come to R.A.M. Knitwear. This is another machine knitter here in Shetland. Her name is Roisin, and she has beautiful modern prints on her machine knitting. Roisin used to teach machine knitting at the University of Highlands and Islands based here in Shetland, and recently went off on her own and started this business. There's wonderful prints of some of the prints sort of nod towards Fair Isle, traditional Fair Isle, but for the most part they are modern patterns. There's in the window right now, there's a beautiful red and off-white shawl that is fishes. There are jellyfish. There's a banner making reference to Apelia. Roisin actually was able to convert a sketch that the Jarl Squad had for their capes this year into an actual black and white and gray pattern of ravens and Celtic designs, and it's absolutely stunning. You'll need to look and see if you can find them online, find a photo online. I'm going to progress down, and as I do so, I just want to mention that machine knitting is often overlooked by people as an art form or as a craft. That is not the case here in Shetland. It is highly respected as a creative outlet for designers. The University of Highlands and Islands here has a knitwear division that has industrial machines where designers can design different patterns and take it there and have it manufactured as long sheets or smaller items, and then they can take it and do the finishing work. And so you have quite a few different makers here who rely on that service. And it's amazing the creativity that they can get up with the help of the machine knitting. So the next one that is an interesting shop is J.G. Ray Limited, which is a jewelry shop. And there are a lot of different makers here in the islands. And some of them are jewelers, and some of them make themed jewelry that refers to knitting. So there's different pendants that make a nod toward Fair Isle patterns. There's also different jeweler. I don't believe she sells here, but there's other jewelers who make sheep-themed jewelry, and others that just make lovely little pieces. So one of the amazing things about Shetland is just how many creative people there are who have either a side job or are working full-time creating art. Really, I mean, craft, sure, you could call it craft, but honestly, the quality of it, I think, qualifies it as art. There's really just beautiful work being done here in glass and beading and jewelry and machine knitting, as I said, and painters, and it's just really amazing to see. The next shop right next door to J.G. Ray Limited is Loose Ends, which is another well-known yarn store. This is another of those yarn stores that is an actual yarn store. It's not dedicated to one type of yarn. So you can find many different kinds of yarns inside, including Uredale yarn. This is the one place in town where you can find Uredale yarn without having to go out to the farm itself. So if you have time, I strongly recommend that you see if you can get out to Uredale Farm, which is out in Scalloway. It's about a half hour out of town. If you can't, you can come find their yarn here. It is an organically raised and processed wool, Shetland wool, 100% Shetland breed wool. But if you need anything else, thread, sewing supplies, this is also a good shop. And down below, they've actually acquired this space down below the shop, and down below it you can find hand knitted items, other crafted items, felted items, things like that, made by local folks. And come and check the windows, because they do host knit nights either here or at other places around the island. So this is a good place to see if you can find a place to pop into while you're here. I'm just going to let this van, maybe not, they're stopping. Okay, I'm going to progress along the street again. So as we pass along, it can be easy to think, after everything that I just covered, that this is just like a tourist lane and it's all tourist stores for people, but that is not the case. This is the commercial street, and it is the commercial center of Shetland, basically. There are athletic clothing stores, there are normal clothing stores. The Shetland Parliamentary Office is coming up on my left here. There are hair salons, there are restaurants, there's a candy store, there's several handmade toiletry store, there's a pharmacy. And down towards the end of the shop is Harry's Department Store. And if you are here and realize you forgot something, Harry's Department Store is the place that you should go to try and find what you're missing. Now, I am going to continue walking, but we have basically reached the end of Commercial Street. It carries on now into a parking area just underneath Fort Charlotte. Fort Charlotte was built here, I'm going to say a date and then I'm going to be wrong, hundreds of years ago. It's a huge stone fort in the middle of the town. And was built because the government of the UK was afraid of invasions of the UK starting from the north. And Shetland, of course, is the place furthest north. So they needed to protect Lerwick Harbour from invasion. And they still have the massive cannons in place. They used to be fired off regularly. Eventually they stopped. The story I've been told is that one of the practice shots crossed the harbor, landed in Bressa, the island across the harbor, bounced a few times, hit a cow, and they said, let's not do this anymore. As I walk along this part of the street, to my right, I can see the ferry crossing to Bressa. The ferry crossing is easy enough to do. If you are walking, you just walk on, have a seat on the upper floor, and they will come around and take your ferry fare. And then you can walk off on the other side. And there are things to do within walking distance of the ferry on the other side. Speldeburn Cafe is over there in the old elementary school. There are several businesses also located in the school, including R.A.M Knitwear. That's where she has her production space. The cafe is delicious. Bressa is full of interesting ruins and things to explore. Garth's Croft is also over there. You can call the owner, Chris Dyer, and arrange a tour there, and he'll take you and show you his Shetland sheep and talk to you about modern crafting. And the ferries run very regularly. It's a sheltered harbor, so it's very rare that those get canceled. So you can pretty much rely on the Bressa ferry running. Now I am going to actually cross the street here and take a little shortcut through the neighborhoods because our tour is not over. There's still more for knitters to know about. I'm going to walk up the hill here. And as I do so, I am on Harbor Street. So I'm walking up Harbor Street, and I'm going to actually stop recording. I'm going to later on find a song that is 4.5 minutes long, let's say, and I'll stop recording for 4.5 minutes. And I'm going to continue walking to get to Jamison and Smith, so you can have a sense of how long it actually takes to get to Jamison and Smith from the middle of town, because I know some of you are going to want to walk it because it's worth it. So here I am. I'm going to stop recording. I'm going to watch my watch, and I'll turn it back on after 4.5 minutes, and I'll talk to you more then. I have no idea what the song's going to be. I'm literally going to search for a song that's 4.5 minutes long. I'll see you on the other side. been 4.5 minutes. I have not made it to Jamison and Smith yet. In fact, I actually changed the path I was walking because I forgot about a shop that I wanted to tell you about. So the next shop that I wanted to tell you about is called Odie's Antiques, and you can find them on Facebook, but they do not have any signage on their store at this point anyway. It has been painted yellow and it has red around the windows. It's an antique shop and it's a wonderful place to hop in and poke around in. They have every now and then you will find some really lovely vintage items in here relating to knitting, either knitting tools or books or other craft materials, and it's a fun store. They do estate cleanouts, and they will keep the things that they think are valuable for the shop and bring it in and sell it there, and just some really wonderful finds available in there. So I am walking now along one of the more main streets in town, and I'm sure that you can hear the traffic has picked up considerably. So I am still not close to Jamison and Smith. Even though I changed my path, I did it in a way that is not going to alter the amount of time that it takes to get there. So I am going to continue walking along the way. Now, as you're walking out to Jamison and Smith, people are sometimes concerned about the safety of the walk because it is along the main road, but it is all lined with sidewalks, I believe, until you get to the final street. I think at the final street it's more of a residential area, so you don't get the sidewalks at that point, but it's still, then it's a residential area, so it's not as bad. Do apologize for the wind. I just came around the corner of a building and got it full on. So I'm going to continue to walk and talk and check for traffic. If you're coming from a place where they drive on the right, make sure that you check the other side of the street. Look the other way that you are inclined to before you cross the street, or just be safe and look both ways. But I am going to put down the microphone again, and I will look for a 3-minute song, and I'll play that, and I'll be back.
You've been told, but no one's been a friend of mine. From the day I drove the car to the riverbed, they'd never heard a word I've said. So pardon me for acting wise. I know what hides behind those eyes. Where do we go when the fight comes knocking at our door? Where do we hide when the change
Just kidding. So I said 3 minutes. And it's actually been 5, but I decided to just keep walking because the traffic noise was so loud along the road there that it would have been useless to try and record. It has been very, very wet here in Shetland. Lots of rain this winter. Pretty much rain every day. I think there's been one day when there wasn't any rain. And there's been at least a light rain. Very windy too. But it's February in the North Sea, so what do you expect? But the roads are wet, which means the traffic is even noisier than usual. So I have made it to North Road. This is the road that Jamieson and Smith is located on. Locally, Jamieson and Smith is known as the wool brokers because that's what they were for the longest time. They were the place where people brought their wool to sell it. They would get back in payment wool that they could use for knitting or money, depending. It wasn't until much later that they began making yarn to sell on the open market. And now they're very well known for their beautiful wools. Many, many colors, perfect for Fair Isle and stranded colorwork knitting. And they also have the Shetland Heritage line, which is all worsted spun, which is how it was done by hand back in the day by the local spinners who would produce their own wool or their own yarn for their home knitting. That line also uses Shetland breed wool. So that's a nice thing to know about it too. So I am getting closer. We are almost there, believe it or not. So you can look at how much time it's taken. Add 2 minutes. And that's how long it takes to walk from the middle of town at a comfortable pace to Jamieson and Smith. Now, Jamison and Smith, as I said, it is in a very residential area. It's on the edge of a residential area. So one side of the street is all houses. The other side of the street is a blend of houses and businesses, but more industrial businesses. This is a different feel to the other part of town. The other part of town is full of full of buildings that were built, some of them as far back as the 1600s. Big stone buildings. This side of town has the modern harbor. It has a modern grocery store. It has car dealerships, things like that. If you're walking, you're sort of cut off from most of that. That's sort of one street down. It's the other side of the street that I'm walking on. So Jamieson and Smith is just up here on the right. They've gone through a big remodel over the last year or so. So used to be very dark in the shop, dark wood, sort of closed in feeling. It was very spacious. They had huge cubbies on the wall that they would fill with the different colored yarns. Now it's much more open inside. It used to have the counter where you would pay in the middle of the shop. That's been moved to the back. The cubbies are still there along the wall, but everything's a nice honey shade of wood now. And there's a big open space in the back, up a few stairs, where they can have classes. To the left of the shop is the wool shed, where they still take in most of the wool clip that is grown here in Shetland. It's all graded and sorted in that wool shed, and then it is shipped down to the mainland to be processed at a mill there and returns to them as their wool. Oliver Henry, of course, is very well known as the long-term wool grader and sorter here, and he was the Shetland Wool Week patron several years ago. If you catch him on a day when he's working, he's happy to talk to people about what he does. But he is a busy man, so don't take up too much of his time. But he is a very friendly man as well. Always has a story to share and always happy to meet new people. So if I were to continue from here, and I'm not going to today. Oh, one last thing about Jamieson and Smith. They are not open on the weekends. So if you come on a weekend, you are going to be out of luck. If you are really hoping to be here and get into the shop itself, you need to be here on a weekday. So if I were to continue, and as I said, I'm not going to, I could continue walking down North Road and take a right when I see the main road to my right side again. And if I follow that main road around and stay on it and turn off to the right, then I would be at the Shetland Textile Museum. Now, the Shetland Textile Museum is a part of the main museum system here, but it is run by textile-loving trustees and volunteers. It's small. You enter into a gift shop, and then there's another floor on the ground floor that is dedicated to weaving. You go upstairs, and they have the room that's dedicated to items from their permanent collection. And then the other room, oftentimes they'll have some sort of contest or theme that they will be displaying items in related to that, or it might be more items from the permanent collection. The gift shop in there is fantastic. It's all stocked by local fiber makers. So there's weavers, there's machine knitters, there's hand knitters, there's dyers, there's spinners, there's local wools. It is definitely worth getting into. The hours are limited, so make sure you check the hours. And they are only open, I want to say, from May to basically the end of Wool Week, whenever that hits in October. I think they do extend maybe by a week, but that's about all. There is another museum in town called the Shetland Museum and Archives that you cannot miss. So that is back in town. And when I said I was cutting to go up the hill from Commercial Street, if I had continued to go straight and then straight a little bit more, I would have gotten to a roundabout. And at that roundabout, if I had turned right, that would have taken me down to the Shetland Museum and Archives. That is a museum for the entirety of Shetland. They talk about the geology of Shetland. They talk about Shetland in wartime. You know, they talk about Shetland through the ages. But they have brilliant displays throughout. And through those displays, there's a lot about the textile history of Shetland, going back to Pictish weavers all the way up to modern Fair Isle knitters. And the knitting section is on the second floor. If you have accessibility issues, there is a elevator. And there are several displays dedicated just to knitting, Shetland lace and Fair Isle. But a lot of people sort of see that and move on from there. But take the time to go through the other exhibits too, because there are other examples of knitting and knitting tools sort of scattered throughout. So that is Lerwick, and I'm going to walk back now to my flat, which is way back on the other side of town, not far from Baines Beach where we started. And going to move on with my day. This episode will probably come out, and then the next episode will be an interview with Elizabeth Johnson, if all goes well. I'm actually headed over to her house this afternoon to do that interview. It's been a wonderful time to be here in Shetland, to be able to take part in Appelia and to see that wonderful local tradition, and not just for the spectacle. I mean, everybody gets to see the spectacle. It's a live streaming event. If you want to see it, it's still out there. You can probably find it on YouTube and watch it there. The wonderful thing about Appelia was being here in the days before and just popping into a shop and hearing local folks talk about it and theorizing about what the Jarl Squad's costumes were going to be like and what they could expect at the halls, and just the general eagerness for the event, especially after having it closed down for 2 years. This was also the first year that the Lerwick Appelia was able to have women on the squads. And my understanding was that there were 6 women this year. And some people are grumpy about that, but you have to keep in mind that these squads are formed years in advance. And so they are limited in numbers as well. The number of squads is limited, and the number of people on the squads is limited. So as people retire from the squads, there'll be more opportunity for women to be brought into the squads. So it was great to be in one of the halls and see some of the women who were on the squads. I saw 3 in the course of the evening. They were all dressed as men. It seems like cross-dressing is a big part of the whole dress-up part of Apellia. But I do recommend that you try and make it to Apellia at least once if you can, even just to see the public portion of it. But I am having to walk back now. It is into the wind, and I hope you enjoyed this little audio tour of Commercial Street in Lerwick and the walk out to some of the shops that are further afield. I hope that someday I see you here. Of course, Jolene and I at Island Vista, I should say, do run the tours that happen 2 times a year. They happen in the springtime and they happen in the late summer. And we would love to have you along for one of those too. We take care of all the planning for you. We take you to a lot of these spots that I mentioned, but we also take you a lot more places around the islands to meet the wonderful people here making wool, preserving the heritage knitting that's going on here, and meeting some Shetland ponies and sheeps. If you come in the spring, you get to meet the lambs. I'm just going to duck into a bus shelter for a moment as I say a proper goodbye because the wind really is picking up. Take care, everyone. As I said, I'm headed back to my flat now and on with my day, and I look forward to being back with you again in a few weeks. Bye-bye.
A few more things before I go. First, you heard me mention Oliver Henry toward the end there. Just 2 minutes after I stopped recording and started walking back, I looked over and there was Oliver out walking the dog with his wife. We chatted for a bit and he sends his hellos to those of you whom he met in the course of the tours last year. Second, you heard me mention R.A.M Knitwear and Glance and Glass, and I didn't actually name them by name, but I did refer to Shetland jewelry in a roundabout way. They are just 3 of the 6 craftspeople we will learn from on the Macking Our Way Through Shetland Contemporary Crafts Tours this year, and there is officially only 1 spot left in the August tour, and then all of the tours for 2023 will be filled. If you have been holding back, now is the time to act. Learn more about the tours by visiting IthoughtIKnewHow.com and clicking the link to Shetland Tours 2023. We would love to have you along on that tour. I'm going to go get this ready to post. The last episode went out okay without me having to monitor it, so I assume that this one will too. And then I'll be back again in a few weeks with my interview with Elizabeth Johnston. Thank you for listening and knitting with me for a bit. If you'd like to support the show, check the show notes for ways to make that happen. Special thanks to my patrons, Knit New Haven and Morehouse Farm for sponsoring the podcast. The show notes are also where you will find links to any reference materials I use as I prepared the show, so be sure to check those out. Find me on my social media accounts as I Thought I Knew How, except on Twitter, where it's just Thought I Knew How. The groups on various platforms are all called I Thought I Knew How Podcast. Until next time, may you be blessed with stitches that never drop, yarn without joins, and plenty of time to knit.